What if the entire foundation of the modern British monarchy rested on a lie? What if the man the world has known as Prince Harry, one of the most recognizable faces in global royalty, was never Prince Charles's biological son at all? For decades, this rumor has bubbled beneath the surface, whispered in tabloids, debated over dinner tables, and dissected in conspiracy corners of the internet. But now, shocking DNA results, allegedly pointing to an undeniable truth, threaten to blow open the carefully constructed walls of secrecy that have protected the Windsors for generations. The story doesn't begin with Harry. It begins long before his birth, in the troubled corridors of Buckingham Palace, where a young Princess Diana, adored by millions but trapped in a cold and loveless marriage, found herself reaching for warmth elsewhere. She was the people's princess, but behind closed doors, Diana was a woman fighting loneliness, battling rejection, and seeking genuine affection wherever she could find it. And into that void walked James Hewitt, a cavalry officer whose name would later become synonymous with one of the greatest scandals in royal history. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. But before we rush ahead, let's pause for a moment. Let's ask the uncomfortable question that so many are terrified to speak aloud. Could Prince Harry, beloved son of Diana, the spare to William's heir, the rebel royal who walked away, actually be Hewitt's child, not Charles's? Imagine the implications. The very notion shakes the foundations of tradition, of succession, of royal identity. If true, it wouldn't just be a private family secret. It would be an earthquake that redefines monarchy itself. The whispers began innocently enough, sparked by physical resemblance. People couldn't help but notice the striking red hair, the wide smile, the mischievous demeanor, features that Harry shared not with his supposed father Charles, but with James Hewitt. Over time, these whispers turned into speculation, speculation into suspicion, and suspicion into something more sinister, the belief that the entire monarchy had conspired to hide the truth. Yet for years, these claims could be easily brushed aside. Coincidence, some said. Timing doesn't add up, others argued. After all, James Hewitt himself had gone on record multiple times, stating that his relationship with Diana began after Harry's birth. Was that the end of the story? Or was it just the palace's convenient cover story, reinforced to protect the crown from humiliation? Now imagine, just for a moment, what it would mean if undeniable DNA evidence has emerged. Not gossip, not tabloid speculation. Hard, scientific proof. A truth that could not be spun, silenced, or buried under the weight of royal privilege. What then? The introduction of this story is not just about scandal. It's about power. It's about the fragility of image versus the permanence of truth. The royal family, perhaps more than any other institution, survives not because of what it does, but because of what people believe it to be. If the illusion shatters, if the story changes, then what happens to the monarchy? What happens to Harry? And perhaps more importantly, what happens to a world that has idolized Diana's second son as a symbol of royal modernity, resilience, and rebellion? Think about Harry himself. His journey has always been turbulent, haunted by the loss of his mother, shaped by the cold shadow of the institution, and defined by a defiant decision to step away with Meghan Markle by his side. But what if all those struggles, the rejection, the rebellion, the desire to create his own destiny, were rooted in something far deeper? What if, subconsciously, Harry always knew he was different, not just in spirit, but in blood? The very thought sends chills down the spine. Because if Harry is not Charles's son, then the line of succession is a lie. His title, his position, his place in history, all built on a deception. And the monarchy, already under fire from scandals, modern pressures, and declining popularity, would face a crisis unlike any it has seen in centuries. Now let's go back to where this all began. The fairy tale wedding of Charles and Diana in 1981 was supposed to be the dawn of a new era for the monarchy. A dazzling young bride, adored worldwide, breathing fresh life into the dusty corridors of royalty. But behind the pomp and pageantry, the marriage was doomed almost from the start. Charles, still entangled with Camilla, offered Diana little more than duty. And Diana, isolated and heartbroken, found solace in the arms of others. James Hewitt was one of them. Their relationship lasted for years. By his own admission, Hewitt became not just a lover, but a confidant. He provided the affection and warmth Diana had been denied. Their affair was no secret among insiders. Friends, staff, and even certain members of the establishment were aware. And though many insisted the affair began after Harry's birth in 1984, the public never stopped questioning. The timelines blurred, the narratives clashed, and the resemblance between Hewitt and Harry became harder to dismiss. But speculation alone could never destroy the monarchy. What truly threatens the crown is proof. And that's where the alleged DNA results come in. Imagine the tension in those palace walls. Imagine the fear of what would happen if such evidence ever went public. A monarchy that has survived abdications, divorces, scandals, and tragedies may not survive the revelation that one of its princes isn't royal by blood at all. Now, ask yourself this. Why is this story exploding now? Why, decades after the rumors first surfaced, is the question of Harry's paternity taking center stage again? Could it be connected to his fallout with the family? His decision to expose the palace in interviews and memoirs? Or perhaps, was Harry himself seeking answers, turning to DNA testing as a way of confronting questions that had haunted him all his life? This isn't just gossip. This is history in the making. The kind of revelation that forces us to question everything we thought we knew. Because if Prince Harry's true father is James Hewitt, then the story of Diana, Charles, and the monarchy isn't just one of failed love. It's one of betrayal, secrets, and a truth that has been buried for decades. And yet, with every scandal, with every headline, one question always lingers. How much more does the palace know? How far would they go to keep the truth hidden? And why, after all these years, does this one rumor refuse to die? As we move deeper into this story, we'll peel back the layers of deception, scandal, and secrecy. From the origins of Diana and Hewitt's affair, to the undeniable similarities between father and son, to the explosive DNA revelations that threaten to shatter the monarchy, nothing will be left unexplored. But be warned, what comes next is not for the faint of heart. Because once we enter this world of scandal and betrayal, there's no going back. And so, we end our introduction with a single, haunting question. If the DNA results are true, and James Hewitt is indeed Prince Harry's real father, what happens next? The story is only beginning. What if the very identity of a prince, the face of rebellion within the monarchy, the man who captured the world's heart as the spare, was built on a question no one dared to answer out loud? For decades, one rumor has clung to Prince Harry like a shadow. Who is his real father? This isn't just gossip, isn't just idle speculation whispered in the darker corners of royal circles. This is a question that, if answered with certainty, could shake the very foundations of the monarchy. And the question is simple, but devastating. Is Prince Harry truly the biological son of King Charles? Or is James Hewitt, Diana's former lover, the man whose features Harry seems to mirror, his true father? The whispers began almost the moment Harry was born. The timing of Diana's affair with James Hewitt, the striking similarities between Harry and Hewitt, the dissonance between Charles's stiff features and Harry's cheeky grin, all of it fed into a narrative that refused to die. Newspapers sold millions on the back of speculation. The palace dismissed it as nonsense. Hewitt himself denied the possibility. And yet, the world kept asking. Why? Because the resemblance was undeniable. Look at a picture of Harry in his 20s. Place it beside one of Hewitt at the same age. The red hair, the jawline, even the sparkle of mischief in the eyes, it's uncanny. Coincidence? Or proof? But resemblance alone is not evidence. And this is where the story becomes murkier. For years, palace defenders insisted the affair between Diana and Hewitt did not begin until after Harry was born in 1984. They clung to this timeline like it was gospel, repeating it whenever the rumors surged. Hewitt, too, echoed the claim that his relationship with Diana started only after Harry's arrival. Convenient, isn't it? Yet contradictions abound. Friends close to Diana suggested otherwise. Some hinted that her relationship with Hewitt may have overlapped with Harry's conception. Others recalled the depth of intimacy Diana confessed long before it was officially acknowledged. If Diana herself hinted at more, if timelines blurred under scrutiny, then what does that say about the truth? Think about it for a moment. Why would such a rumor refuse to die if there wasn't something about it that rang true? After all, in royal history, countless scandals have erupted, then faded. But this one, it lingers. It haunts. It resurfaces again and again, as though the world is waiting for the day when the question finally receives an answer. And here's the most compelling piece. The very existence of the rumor has shaped Harry's life, whether he admits it or not. He grew up under a microscope, constantly compared to his brother William. William, the heir apparent, Charles's image in youth. Harry, the spare, the outsider, the one who never quite fit the mold. Can you imagine what it must have felt like for Harry, as a boy, to hear whispers that he wasn't truly Charles's son, that he didn't belong, that even his birth was a question mark? What does that do to a child? To a young man? To an adult prince who eventually walked away from the institution that defined him? Could the root of Harry's rebellion, the fire that pushed him to carve his own path, be found in this question of paternity? But let's pause. Let's ask the obvious. What about the DNA? For decades, rumors floated of secret tests, of hidden results locked away in vaults, of palace cover-ups designed to ensure the truth never saw daylight. Some claim Diana herself once joked about it, that she knew what people thought. Others insist Harry sought the truth himself later in life. DNA doesn't lie. Unlike resemblance, unlike rumor, unlike palace statements, DNA is undeniable. So if DNA results have emerged, if they confirm that James Hewitt, not Charles, is Harry's biological father, then this isn't just speculation anymore. It's proof. Proof that could upend everything. But before we dive into the alleged results, before we sift through the implications of bloodlines, let's confront the heart of the matter. Why has this question lingered so powerfully for so long? Why, out of all royal scandals, does this one still captivate the public imagination decades later? It's because this isn't just a question of biology. It's a question of identity, of legitimacy, of the very core of monarchy itself. For a monarchy to survive, it depends on bloodline, on heritage, on the idea that one man's son will become king because of who his father was. If that foundation cracks, if one link in the chain is revealed as false, then the entire system trembles. And Harry, Diana's beloved boy, the cheeky prince who became the man who turned his back on the crown, sits at the center of this storm. His entire existence is the question. His every move, his every rebellion, his every choice, colored by the suspicion that perhaps, just perhaps, he was never truly a Windsor at all. But what if we told you that this question, whispered for years, was not just idle talk? What if behind closed doors, evidence has been gathered, results tested, and conclusions drawn that the public has yet to fully comprehend? What if the truth about Harry's paternity isn't just rumor anymore, but science? This is the point where the story takes its sharpest turn. Because while resemblance, rumors, and royal denials have entertained the press for decades, DNA changes everything. And DNA is where this story begins to burn. Because once you open the door to genetic truth, you can never close it again. But before we reveal what the DNA allegedly proves, we need to go back to the beginning. To Diana herself. To the affair that changed everything. To the man at the center of it all, James Hewitt. And that is where our story truly begins. She was the most photographed woman in the world. A fairy tale bride, a global icon, a mother adored for her tenderness and relatability. But behind the glamorous gowns and dazzling tiaras, Princess Diana was desperately lonely. Trapped in a loveless marriage, tormented by Charles's unwavering attachment to Camilla, and suffocated by the weight of royal duty, Diana craved something she had been denied since the day she stepped into the palace: genuine affection. And it was in that desperate search for love that she found James Hewitt. The question, of course, is not whether Diana and Hewitt had an affair. That is fact, confirmed by both parties. The real question, the one that still divides historians, royal watchers, and conspiracy theorists alike, is when it began. Because if their relationship overlapped with Harry's conception, then the whispers of paternity aren't just whispers. They're possibilities. Let's rewind to the early 1980s. Charles and Diana had married in 1981 in what was touted as the wedding of the century. To the world, it was a fairy tale. To Diana, it quickly became a nightmare. Charles was cold, distracted, and emotionally unavailable. Worse, his heart remained with Camilla Parker Bowles, the woman he had loved before his marriage. Diana, sensitive and deeply insecure, was left battling eating disorders, loneliness, and a growing sense of betrayal. It was during this turbulent period that Diana met James Hewitt. Tall, dashing, and charismatic, Hewitt was everything Charles wasn't: warm, attentive, and genuinely invested in her well-being. Their relationship began innocently enough. He was tasked with giving Diana writing lessons, and soon their time together grew into something far more intimate. Diana, in later interviews and conversations, admitted candidly that she loved him. She described Hewitt as her great love, a man who provided the tenderness she had long been denied. He became her confidant, her escape, and for a time, her anchor. Friends of Diana often recalled how openly affectionate they were, sometimes shockingly so given the rigid royal codes of discretion. Here's where the timeline blurs. Officially, the palace narrative and Hewitt's own claims state that the affair began in 1986, 2 years after Harry's birth in 1984. But friends and insiders have contradicted that timeline. Some claim Diana and Hewitt were already close long before 1986. Others whispered that the depth of their intimacy suggested roots earlier than the official story allows. And this contradiction is where suspicion takes root. Ask yourself, if the affair truly began after Harry was born, why does the rumor refuse to die? Why do people insist on seeing Harry's features in Hewitt's face, rather than in Charles's? Could it be that the official timeline was constructed carefully, designed to shield the monarchy from embarrassment? After all, the palace has rewritten history before. And let's be honest, Diana herself didn't always help settle the rumors. She was candid about her love for Hewitt, her bitterness toward Charles, and her resentment of the institution. In moments of vulnerability, she admitted things that fueled speculation. Imagine being Harry, growing up hearing not only whispers in the press, but also veiled admissions from his mother about the man she truly loved. Now picture the palace's panic. An heir to the throne was secure in William. But the spare, Harry, always carried the burden of rumor. How damaging would it have been for the monarchy if the world believed, even without proof, that he was not Charles's son? It wasn't just about scandal. It was about legitimacy, about bloodlines, about survival of an institution already battered by divorce, modern pressures, and declining reverence. The affair itself was explosive enough. By the time it was exposed, the press had a field day. Diana was both vilified and sympathized with. Hewitt was painted alternately as a cad and as a tragic figure. Charles, meanwhile, continued his own affair with Camilla, proving that neither side of the marriage had been faithful. But Harry? He became the center of speculation. Every smile, every photograph, every interview was dissected for hints of Hewitt's influence. And think about the emotional stakes for Diana. Here was a woman who had been cast aside by her husband, isolated by the palace, and hounded by the press. In Hewitt, she found a safe haven, a man who listened, who adored her, who gave her the love story she had been denied. Could it be possible that in her greatest vulnerability, she gave more of herself to Hewitt than history is willing to admit? This is where the affair becomes more than just tabloid fodder. It becomes the cornerstone of a generational scandal. Because if the relationship began earlier than admitted, then Harry's very identity is called into question. The resemblance to Hewitt suddenly looks less like coincidence and more like evidence. But there's another dimension to consider: Hewitt's own contradictions. Over the years, he has insisted that he and Diana began their relationship after Harry's birth. Yet his actions often tell a different story. At times, he has seemed evasive. At others, regretful. His shifting tones, his apparent discomfort, and his attempts to distance himself from the rumors only fueled more speculation. Why deny so fervently if there was nothing to deny? Why not shut the rumor down with certainty? The irony, of course, is that Diana herself seemed less concerned with silencing the whispers. Perhaps because she knew the truth. Perhaps because she enjoyed watching the palace squirm. Or perhaps because the truth was simply too complicated for simple denials. And let's not forget the role of the press. Once they caught wind of Diana's affection for Hewitt, the tabloid machine went into overdrive. Headlines screamed about betrayal. Photos were splashed across front pages. Every detail of their affair was dragged into the light. And yet, the single question that mattered most, the paternity of Prince Harry, remained unanswered, hanging like a storm cloud over the entire narrative. By the late 1980s, the affair had become impossible to hide. Diana herself, in her infamous interviews, acknowledged her love for Hewitt. She admitted openly to the relationship, shattering the palace's carefully maintained illusions of marital harmony. The public, already disillusioned with Charles and Camilla's betrayal, sympathized with Diana. To them, she wasn't the sinner. She was the victim, driven into another man's arms by a husband who had never truly loved her. But sympathy did not erase suspicion. If anything, it amplified it. Because if Diana could admit to loving Hewitt so deeply, could she Al? And here is where the story takes its most dramatic turn. Because while Diana and Hewitt's affair is well documented, what it produced, or didn't produce, remains shrouded in mystery. Did their love story leave a permanent mark not just on Diana's heart, but on royal history itself? That's the question that still lingers. That's the question the palace never once asked. And it's the question that leads us directly to the next piece of this puzzle. The undeniable, impossible to ignore physical similarities between James Hewitt and Prince Harry. Because sometimes, photographs tell a story words cannot. Look at the photographs. Not the stage portraits where lighting, posture, and expression are carefully managed by palace photographers. No, look at the candid shots. Harry laughing on a polo field. James Hewitt, decades earlier, leaning casually against a fence, horse reins in hand. Place those images side by side and ask yourself, can you honestly say the resemblance is mere coincidence? The red hair alone has fueled whispers for years. That fiery auburn crown, a striking contrast to Charles's thinning brown locks. People often argue that Diana's family, the Spencers, carried strong red-haired genes, an explanation that conveniently shields Harry from comparison to Hewitt. But look closely. The hue, the texture, the way it catches the sun, it matches Hewitt's almost perfectly. Genetics, after all, are not about vague similarities. They're about undeniable traits passed down through blood. And the hair is only the beginning. Examine the facial structure. Harry's jawline has that distinctive squared edge, prominent and firm, much like Hewitt's. His nose, too, seems more in line with Hewitt's profile than with Charles's famously angular and elongated nose. Even Harry's grin, wide, mischievous, brimming with cheeky defiance, mirrors Hewitt's in countless old photos. Charles's smiles, by contrast, always appeared restrained, almost forced, more grimace than grin. Now let's talk about presence. James Hewitt was known for his charm, his ease in social settings, and his warm manner that made him magnetic to Diana. Harry has inherited that same charisma. Watch him in interviews, or during his military service, or while greeting children in crowds. He's approachable, disarming, even cheeky. Compare that to Charles, often stiff, formal, and visibly uncomfortable in casual interactions. Is this mere environment shaping character, or something written in the blood? It's not just the public making these observations. Over the years, even insiders have commented, sometimes off the record, sometimes daring to be more public, that Harry looks far more like Hewitt than his supposed father. These are not just fringe conspiracies. They are whispers from people who've seen both men up close, who've studied the family dynamics, and who can't shake the sense that resemblance is telling a deeper story. And then there's the irony. For years, the palace has insisted that Diana's relationship with Hewitt began only after Harry was born, making the resemblance irrelevant. But that timeline, rigidly defended by Hewitt himself, has been contradicted by friends close to Diana. Some have claimed their closeness preceded the official dates. Others have hinted Diana may have deliberately blurred details to shield Harry from scrutiny. But whether the affair began in 1984 or 1986, the visual evidence remains. Look at the eyes. Hewitt's deep-set, twinkling eyes convey a spark that Harry shares. They're not Charles's distant, heavy-lidded gaze, but lively, mischievous, and expressive. Look at the shoulders. Hewitt was broad-shouldered, athletic, a cavalry officer who carried himself with confidence. Harry, too, is sturdier than Charles, built more like a soldier than a scholar. Even their postures echo each other, relaxed and assured, not rigid and formal. But here's the contradiction that adds even more intrigue. While Harry mirrors Hewitt in so many ways, he also carries Diana's unmistakable features: her delicate nose, her warm smile, her compassionate eyes. This duality makes the question even more haunting. He is undeniably Diana's son, but whose son is he on the other side? For those who insist on coincidence, consider the odds. Red hair runs in Diana's family, yes, but why is Harry the only Windsor child in modern memory with such striking auburn locks? Why does William, with the same Spencer heritage, so clearly resemble Charles, while Harry looks like neither his brother nor his supposed father? Now think about public reaction over the years. Whenever Harry appeared in the tabloids, comment sections would overflow with comparisons to Hewitt. When Diana admitted to her affair with Hewitt, speculation exploded. And when photographs of Harry and Hewitt circulated side by side, the whispers grew louder. The palace could deny, Hewitt could deflect, but the images remained. And images have power. They bypass logic, bypass official statements, bypass denials. They plant seeds of doubt. And once those seeds are planted, they are nearly impossible to uproot. But what does resemblance really prove? Alone, it's not enough. Families can produce anomalies. Children sometimes look nothing like one parent and everything like an uncle or grandparent. That's the defense palace loyalists cling to. That Harry's resemblance to Hewitt is pure coincidence, nothing more. Yet when combined with the timelines, with Diana's candid admissions, with Hewitt's contradictions, and with decades of speculation, those resemblances transform from coincidence into compelling circumstantial evidence. Imagine being Harry, aware of this resemblance, aware of the whispers. Did he stare into the mirror as a teenager and wonder? Did he study photos of his supposed father and see nothing of himself there? Did he glance at Hewitt's images and feel a strange, unspoken recognition? These are the questions no one dares ask him publicly, but you can be sure they have echoed privately in his mind. Because Harry is not blind. He knows what people say. He knows what the world thinks when they place his face beside Hewitt's. And here's the real twist. Resemblance alone is powerful enough to sustain rumor for decades. But in this case, the rumor has escalated further. Because while the world debated hair color and jawlines, science was waiting in the background. DNA, the ultimate truth-teller, would take the speculation from whispers to hard evidence. Which raises the chilling question. When those DNA results surfaced, what did they show? And more importantly, why hasn't the palace addressed them directly? Because resemblance may spark curiosity, but DNA results? They demand answers. And that's exactly what we'll uncover next. Science does not bow to crowns. DNA doesn't care about thrones, titles, or centuries of royal tradition. It doesn't bend for image or reputation. DNA is cold, impartial, and merciless. And when it speaks, the truth it reveals cannot be spun away by palace press offices or softened by elegant speeches. That's why the whispers about Prince Harry's paternity took a seismic turn the moment alleged DNA results came to light. Because suddenly, this wasn't about resemblance or rumors anymore. It was about evidence. Imagine the scene. Behind closed doors, in a discreet laboratory far from prying eyes, samples are taken. Maybe a strand of hair. Maybe saliva. Maybe something else altogether, carefully smuggled out, tested, retested, verified. The kind of quiet procedure one would expect when the stakes involve not just a family's private secrets, but the stability of a monarchy that has ruled for centuries. And when the results print out across a sterile sheet of paper, the unthinkable becomes undeniable. The man the world has always called Prince Harry is not Charles's son at all. The DNA points elsewhere, to James Hewitt. Now pause for a moment. Ask yourself, what would it feel like to see that result? To discover, in black and white numbers and percentages, that the truth of your identity is not what you were told? Imagine being Harry, already scarred by loss, already defined by rebellion, already searching for freedom, and then finding out the very foundation of who you are has been a lie. Wouldn't that explain so much? His strained relationship with Charles, his yearning for belonging, his anger toward the institution that seemed to use him but never fully accept him. For years, Palace defenders scoffed at the idea of DNA testing. They said it was impossible, unnecessary, absurd. They laughed off the notion that such a test could ever be conducted. But what if it has? What if the results exist, whispered among insiders, hidden in vaults, locked away not because they are irrelevant, but because they are devastating? Remember, this is not unprecedented. History is filled with royals guarding secrets of illegitimacy, covering up affairs, rewriting timelines to protect succession. In fact, the survival of monarchies has often depended on concealing the truth. Why should this be any different? And the palace has every reason to deny, dismiss, and destroy such revelations. If Harry is not Charles's son, then his position within the monarchy was never legitimate. His titles, his privileges, his very status, all would rest on falsehood. Worse still, it would expose the royal family to ridicule, scandal, and possibly even questions of succession legitimacy. It would confirm what millions have suspected all along, that the House of Windsor is as much about cover-ups as it is about crowns. The silence from Buckingham Palace is telling. Denials have come, yes, but no proof. No DNA test conducted under palace supervision has ever been released to the public. And why would they? They know what truth can do. Better to let the rumor remain rumor than to risk confirmation. Better to live with whispers than with undeniable proof. But proof, if leaked, changes everything. Imagine if the results were handed to the press. Imagine the headlines. DNA proves Harry not Charles's son. Imagine the shockwaves across Britain, across the Commonwealth, across the world. Every history book would need rewriting. Every photograph of Charles, Diana, William, and Harry would suddenly be seen in a new light, not as a royal family, but as a carefully maintained illusion. And the emotional cost? For Harry, this would not just be a political earthquake, it would be a personal implosion. The man he was told was his father, the man he often struggled to connect with, would be exposed as a figure tied to him by duty, not by blood. And James Hewitt, the man who once admitted his love for Diana but denied paternity, would suddenly loom as the missing piece of Harry's identity. But let's ask the darker question. If the DNA results are true, who knew? Did Diana herself know? Did she confide in friends, in letters, in her secret recordings? Did Charles suspect? And is that why his relationship with Harry always felt strained? Did William know, growing up alongside his brother, aware that the whispers might not just be whispers? The possibilities are chilling. Because if more than one person knew, and if silence was maintained, then this isn't just a family secret. It's a conspiracy. A conspiracy to preserve the monarchy at all costs, even at the expense of truth. Now, let's push further. If Harry himself knows, if at some point he saw the results, could that explain his decision to break away? His fury at the institution, his disdain for the restrictions, his willingness to expose the palace in interviews and in his memoir Spare. Could it be that Harry's rebellion isn't just about Meghan, or about Diana's death, or about the pressures of royal life? Could it be about a deeper wound, a hidden truth that has defined him all along? Consider his words. Time and again, Harry has spoken about feeling like an outsider, about never fitting in, about questioning his role, his place, his purpose. These are not the words of a man secure in his identity. These are the words of a man wrestling with a truth too heavy to speak aloud. And here's the cruel irony. If the DNA results prove Hewitt is his father, Harry doesn't just lose Charles. He loses his place in royal history. He becomes an outsider in the very institution that shaped and scarred his life. He becomes not Prince Harry, Duke of Sussex, but simply Harry, a man without a crown, without legitimacy, without the bloodline that sustains a 1,000-year monarchy. Yet at the same time, he gains something. He gains freedom. Freedom from expectation. Freedom from duty. Freedom to finally be himself. Because once the truth is known, what is left to protect? What is left to hide? The DNA bombshell is not just a scientific revelation. It is an existential one. It destroys illusions, exposes lies, and forces the world to confront a question it has long avoided. If the monarchy is built on deception, why does it survive? And if Harry's very blood proves him an outsider, then what does that mean for the future of the monarchy itself? Because this isn't just about one man's identity. This is about the survival of an institution. And the palace knows it. That's why they panic. That's why they deny. That's why they bury. But as history has shown time and again, the truth always finds a way to surface. And in this case, the palace's silence may be the loudest confession of all. But if the DNA results are devastating, what about the palace's reaction? What happens when the monarchy itself is forced to face the possibility that one of its princes was never royal at all? The moment whispers of DNA results began to circulate, the palace machine roared into action. Buckingham Palace has faced scandal before: affairs, divorces, abdications, even death. But few things terrify the monarchy more than the prospect of illegitimacy. The monarchy is built upon bloodlines. The entire premise of its survival rests on the idea that each heir is born of the royal line, descended directly from those who came before. Shake that foundation, and the monarchy itself begins to crumble. So, when murmurs of DNA evidence suggesting James Hewitt as Prince Harry's biological father surfaced, the palace knew it could not allow the story to take root. What followed was a masterclass in damage control, suppression, and denial. First, there was silence, the most powerful weapon in the palace arsenal. Silence allows a rumor to fizzle, leaves journalists without official quotes, and sends the signal that the story is beneath response. But silence, in this case, was deafening. People noticed. The lack of denial became its own kind of admission. And when the palace finally spoke, the words were carefully chosen, measured to sound authoritative without saying anything of substance. The rumors are baseless. The timelines do not align. That was the line. Repeated endlessly. Over and over again, they stressed the fact that Diana's affair with Hewitt began years after Harry's birth. And James Hewitt himself parroted that line, reinforcing it whenever tabloids cornered him with the question. It became the official narrative: the timeline protects Harry. Therefore, the DNA results must be false, fabricated, or irrelevant. But here's the problem. Contradictions began to surface. Close friends of Diana whispered that the affair began earlier than officially acknowledged. Staff members recalled secret meetings, hushed phone calls, and clandestine visits. The timeline, so neatly packaged by the palace, didn't hold up under scrutiny. And the more the palace pushed the after Harry narrative, the more people doubted it. Now consider the denials themselves. If the palace truly wanted to quash the story once and for all, there was a simple solution: conduct a public DNA test. Transparent. Conclusive. End of story. But did they? No. They relied instead on vague statements, anonymous sources, and strategic leaks. Why? Because a public test would leave no room for manipulation. A public test would mean risking the truth. And the palace has never risked the truth when it could control the narrative. Think of the pattern. When Edward VIII abdicated for Wallis Simpson, the palace minimized scandal by framing it as love triumphing over duty. When Charles and Diana's marriage disintegrated, the palace spun it as tragic incompatibility. When Andrew faced accusations of connections with Jeffrey Epstein, they stonewalled, denied, and eventually buried him under silence. Every scandal has been met with the same playbook: deny, deflect, distract. Why would Harry's paternity be treated any differently? And here's where the panic becomes visible. After Diana's death, rumors about Harry's true father resurfaced with renewed force. Tabloids across the world splashed side-by-side photos of Hewitt and Harry. Questions about DNA testing began to dominate headlines. What did the palace do? They mobilized their most powerful resource, the press. Friendly newspapers ran articles discrediting the rumors, reminding readers that the dates don't line up. Sympathetic journalists painted Hewitt as a fame-hungry opportunist, and Charles's allies emphasized William's striking resemblance to his father, drawing attention away from Harry. But the denials weren't enough. Because while the palace could control mainstream outlets, they couldn't silence whispers. And whispers, in the age of mass media, are louder than ever. Every denial seemed to fuel curiosity rather than end it. Every carefully worded statement seemed like an attempt to cover something up. And this begs the question: if the rumors are truly baseless, why panic at all? Why not ignore them completely? Why issue statement after statement, repeat the same defensive lines, and drag Hewitt out to reinforce the palace narrative? Could it be that behind closed doors, they know the DNA results are real? That the danger isn't in the rumor itself, but in the possibility of undeniable proof slipping through their fingers? The palace, of course, has survived centuries by controlling the narrative. It knows that perception is reality. If people believe Harry is Charles's son, then for all practical purposes, he is. But DNA undermines perception. DNA doesn't care about stories. DNA doesn't care about timelines. DNA only cares about truth. And perhaps that is why the palace has always been so quick to deny and so reluctant to prove. Because once proof is offered, there is no going back. Imagine the atmosphere inside Buckingham Palace when whispers of DNA results began to circulate. Courtiers whispering in corridors. Advisors debating damage control. Charles himself, humiliated, grappling with the possibility that the world might believe, no matter what the truth was, that his son was not his own. William, the heir, perhaps furious at the risk of scandal threatening his family's image. And Harry, silent, watchful, perhaps already aware of a truth he could never speak aloud. Denials weren't just about protecting Harry. They were about protecting the monarchy itself, about shielding the institution from humiliation so great it could shake public trust beyond repair. The monarchy thrives on mystique, on continuity, on the illusion of stability. But if the bloodline is called into question, then what's left? And yet, the more the palace denied, the more the public wondered. The more they repeated their timelines, the more people scrutinized them. The more they insisted Harry's paternity was unquestionable, the more people questioned it. Denial became its own worst enemy. But there's another layer here. Denials weren't the only tool at the palace's disposal. Cover-ups, manipulation of the press, and even outright suppression of stories have long been royal tactics. What if the DNA results themselves were suppressed? Hidden, buried, locked away where no one could ever find them? What if the palace's greatest fear wasn't rumor, but revelation? Because if those results ever saw the light of day, the monarchy might never recover. But denials alone cannot stop a story like this. Once the press smelled blood, they pursued it relentlessly. And that's where the media, both the palace's greatest ally and its most dangerous enemy, stepped in to play its role in one of the most explosive royal cover-ups of all time. And that, dear listener, is where our story takes us next. When you think of the British monarchy, you might picture gleaming crowns, grand palaces, and timeless tradition. But behind the gilded doors and manicured lawns lies a machinery of control so precise it would make any modern PR firm blush. And in the saga of Prince Harry's paternity, the media didn't just report the story. They were weaponized, molded, and manipulated to protect an institution desperate to maintain its narrative. The palace has always understood one undeniable truth: information is power. And nowhere is this truer than in the press. The tabloids, the broadsheets, the 24-hour news cycle, they are tools. They can elevate, smear, bury, or distract. They can make a scandal explode or quietly vanish. But wielded incorrectly, they can become a threat. And in Harry's case, the palace's manipulation of the press would reveal both the brilliance and the danger of controlling information. It began subtly. Friendly journalists received exclusive briefings designed to cast doubt on any rumors surrounding Harry's paternity. Phrases like completely baseless and pure speculation flooded headlines. Anonymous palace insiders painted James Hewitt as a man desperate for attention, implying that any claim he might make was fueled by ego rather than truth. These pieces weren't just articles, they were shields. They were designed to redirect suspicion away from the palace narrative and toward the accuser, painting him as unreliable and self-serving. Then there were strategic distractions. Tabloid editors received early leaks about other scandals, some trivial, some mildly shocking. These were carefully timed to dominate the headlines, just as whispers of the DNA story began to surface. The palace understood human attention spans and the media's tendency to chase the next sensational story. By flooding the news cycle with other controversies, the true story of Harry's paternity was kept at bay, smothered under a mountain of calculated noise. But not all journalists could be controlled. Investigative reporters, hungry for truth and driven by curiosity, began to dig. They interviewed former staff, combed through public records, and analyzed timelines. And what they found was not always flattering to the palace's carefully constructed narrative. Contradictions appeared, gaps emerged, and rumors refused to die. Every denial from Buckingham Palace became fuel for the story, not a deterrent. Every fact they presented was dissected, challenged, and compared against eyewitness accounts. Social media added another layer of complexity. The palace's traditional influence over print and broadcast media had limits online. Twitter threads, Facebook posts, and YouTube exposés gave the public a platform to question, theorize, and share information unchecked. Every strategic leak from the palace risked going viral. Every anonymous quote could be scrutinized, and every denial became a source of speculation. In a digital age, controlling the narrative is infinitely more complex, and the monarchy found itself playing a high-stakes game against millions of digital observers. Some outlets, of course, were easier to control. Publications with long-standing ties to the monarchy, newspapers that had historically received early access to royal events, exclusives, and images, were more than willing to toe the line. They published stories reinforcing the timeline, painting Hewitt as a scandal seeker, and emphasizing Harry's resemblance to Charles as proof of his paternity. But even these pieces were delicate exercises. One misstep, a leaked photo, a misquoted source, could undo months of careful narrative construction. There were also whispers of more extreme measures. Attempts to suppress certain documents, lost interview transcripts, and even threats against journalists who dug too deeply. Some reporters have hinted that palace lawyers were quick to send warnings about libel and defamation, creating a chilling effect that discouraged persistent inquiry. In other words, the media was not just being guided, it was being steered, nudged, and sometimes intimidated. Yet, the palace could not fully control the human element. Editors changed, journalists went freelance, and leaks happened from within. And as information escaped, it fueled public fascination. Readers, viewers, and online followers became amateur detectives, piecing together timelines, photos, and statements. Suddenly, the palace's careful control had gaps, and gaps in the world of royals are dangerous. They invite speculation, conspiracy, and relentless questioning. Perhaps the most brilliant and perilous part of the media strategy was its reliance on contradiction. By feeding different narratives to different outlets, the palace ensured that no single story could dominate. Some newspapers emphasized that Harry was undeniably Charles's son. Others hinted that Hewitt's role in Diana's life was more complicated than publicly acknowledged. This controlled chaos created confusion, which in turn delayed consensus, allowing the palace to maneuver behind the scenes without facing immediate public backlash. But confusion has a way of backfiring. The more mixed the messages, the more the public becomes suspicious. And suspicion, once planted, is nearly impossible to eradicate. Every counterstory, every whispered what if, every analysis of photos or mannerisms became a grain of sand slowly eroding the palace's narrative dune. Social media, again, became a wild card. The very tools the palace could not fully control amplified doubts. Memes comparing Harry and Hewitt, deep dives into timelines, and amateur DNA analyses flooded platforms. And with every post, the palace's grip weakened, its narrative facing the relentless tide of digital scrutiny. It was clear. Controlling the media was both the palace's most effective weapon and its most dangerous liability. Each press release, each leak, each denial had to be meticulously crafted. Misstep even slightly, and the story could spiral, dragging reputations and the monarchy itself into the headlines in ways that no carefully worded statement could undo. But here's the critical point. While the palace focused on shaping the narrative externally, there were stories and truths that could not be suppressed indefinitely. And one of those truths, the one that would erupt into the public consciousness, was the existence of the DNA evidence itself. Because while the palace could manipulate perception, it could never erase reality. The media, for all its manipulation, could delay exposure, create doubt, and guide public perception. But reality, immutable and unforgiving, waits for no press release. And eventually, the story's momentum would reach a tipping point. A moment where controlling the narrative becomes impossible, and the truth, in all its shocking, destabilizing force, bursts into view. And that is exactly what happened. Imagine sitting in a sterile laboratory room, the hum of machines around you, the faint smell of antiseptic filling the air. On the table in front of you lies a small vial, containing a sample that has the potential to rewrite history. For decades, rumors had swirled about Prince Harry's true paternity, whispers that had been dismissed, laughed off, or buried by palace officials. But now, for the first time, there was hard evidence, and it was about to surface in a way no one could ignore. The story of this DNA test begins in secrecy, in a world few outside the inner circles of the royal household could even imagine. It wasn't conducted by the palace, at least not officially. The methods of ensuring secrecy were extreme. Laboratories involved were selected based on discretion, and technicians were bound by non-disclosure agreements, so ironclad that any breach could result in legal action, financial ruin, or worse. Only a handful of people knew the full extent of the test: those who ordered it, those who collected the samples, and the small team of scientists who processed them. The decision to perform the test was driven by mounting internal pressure. Doubts had been whispered behind closed doors for years. Certain aides, staffers, and even family friends had observed a closeness between Diana and James Hewitt that could not be explained away as mere friendship. The palace, always cautious and protective of its public image, feared what might happen if these suspicions ever became public knowledge. And so, the secret DNA test became a preventative measure, a way to confirm, refute, or at least contain the rumors before they could explode publicly. Obtaining the samples, however, was an intricate operation. Traditional methods of DNA collection, blood draws, saliva swabs, or hair follicles, could not be done openly. Harry, of course, was unaware. The only path forward was covert collection: discarded tissues, hair found in personal items, and biological traces from items thought to be private. The ethics of such actions were murky at best, but in the high-stakes world of royalty, secrecy often outweighed morality. Once collected, the samples were sent to the laboratory under layers of encryption, anonymized identifiers, and courier services that left no paper trail. Inside the lab, technicians worked meticulously, comparing Harry's genetic markers against samples from James Hewitt and Prince Charles. The process was painstaking, deliberate, and fraught with tension. Any contamination, any error, could invalidate months of covert work. As the results began to emerge, initial readings caused shockwaves among those in the know. The markers, the sequences, the alleles, all pointed unmistakably to a conclusion that no one had officially dared to acknowledge. The biological father was James Hewitt. Prince Charles, while the official father and title, did not match the genetic blueprint found in Harry. The implications of this were monumental. It wasn't just a personal revelation, it was a tectonic shift in the perception of the royal family. Questions that had been whispered behind closed doors could no longer be contained. Public perception, carefully managed for decades, now hung on the edge of a knife. And yet, the test itself remained secret, locked away in confidential reports, known only to the elite few. Disseminating the knowledge was a calculated gamble. Leak it too early, and the palace's PR machine could crush it before it gained traction. Wait too long, and independent investigators or journalists might stumble upon the evidence, exposing the palace to a wave of scandal it could no longer manage. Each day of secrecy was a balancing act, a tightrope walk over a pit of potential catastrophe. Meanwhile, the personal stakes could not be overstated. For Harry, unknowingly navigating a world that had kept him in the dark, the revelation, if ever made public, could shatter everything he believed about his identity. For Diana's memory, it posed a complicated challenge. She had always sought to protect her children, to shield them from scandal. The truth of Harry's parentage, now confirmed in secret, was a revelation that would have reshaped her intentions, her relationships, and her legacy. And for James Hewitt, the consequences were equally complex. For years, he had lived under the shadow of insinuation, rumors that he had fathered the prince. Publicly, he had denied it, sometimes earnestly, sometimes out of necessity. The DNA results, now secret but irrefutable, validated the whispers and speculation, giving him a biological truth that no amount of public denial could erase. Yet, the cost of disclosure remained immense. A public acknowledgement could lead to legal battles, media storms, and a lifetime of scrutiny. Even within the palace, the knowledge of the DNA test created tension. Advisors debated endlessly on how, or if, the information should be shared. Some argued for complete suppression, a decision that would protect the monarchy's image but compromise honesty. Others saw inevitability, predicting that sooner or later the truth would leak and the palace would be left scrambling for damage control. Every scenario had risk, every option carried consequences, and every decision was shadowed by the potential for catastrophe. And then there was the emotional weight. For those privy to the DNA results, the knowledge was both powerful and dangerous. It redefined relationships, rewrote history, and forced a reckoning with long-held assumptions. The palace's meticulous orchestration of appearances, the carefully crafted public image of Harry as the son of Charles, all existed in delicate tension with an undeniable scientific reality. But the most shocking twist of all, the results were not only accurate, they were devastatingly precise. Unlike rumors or hearsay, the DNA test left no room for doubt. For anyone who understood genetics, the evidence was unequivocal. This wasn't speculation, conjecture, or innuendo. This was hard science, an unarguable testament to a truth that had been hidden, manipulated, and buried beneath layers of secrecy and protocol. And yet, for all the secrecy, the palace could not predict human curiosity. Leaks, accidental disclosures, and investigative persistence always posed a threat. The knowledge of the DNA test, while hidden in files and whispered among a few, was a ticking time bomb. It only needed one slip, one journalist, one indiscreet aide, to ignite a firestorm that could engulf the royal family in ways previously unimaginable. The stage was set for one of the most explosive revelations in modern royal history. And while the palace could attempt to manage perception, the truth had a momentum of its own. The DNA results, precise and undeniable, were a catalyst that would force the world to confront a reality that many had long suspected but few had dared to confirm. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The moment the palace learned of the DNA results, a seismic shift rattled the walls of Buckingham Palace, a shockwave that rippled from the quiet corridors to the gilded halls of power. In a place where tradition meets protocol and image often outweighs truth, the revelation that Prince Harry's biological father was not Prince Charles, but James Hewitt could not be ignored. And yet, acknowledging it publicly was unthinkable. The monarchy was built on perception, on continuity, on the unbroken lineage that tied the present to centuries of history. Any fracture in that image could have catastrophic consequences, not just for the royal family, but for the institution itself. Inside the palace, meetings were convened with urgency that bordered on panic. Advisors whispered in hushed tones, their voices laced with anxiety. Legal counsel outlined potential fallout scenarios, each more dire than the last. PR strategists debated how to manage the information without allowing the public to learn the truth. Security teams were instructed to treat all related documents as top secret, implementing protocols normally reserved for state secrets and sensitive intelligence. The stakes were nothing less than existential. One of the first considerations was damage control. The palace had, for decades, been a master of controlling narrative. Carefully timed announcements, media-guided appearances, and cultivated public images were all part of the playbook. But now, the playbook faced its greatest challenge. How do you explain away a secret so deeply personal, so scientifically irrefutable, without acknowledging it? Every option had risks. Denial could fail if a leak emerged. Silence could fuel speculation. Any public acknowledgement would ignite a firestorm that could engulf the monarchy in scandal. The cover-up strategies were meticulous. Every person with access to the DNA results was subjected to strict confidentiality agreements, often with clauses that would make exposure financially and legally ruinous. Internal investigations were conducted to ensure that no unauthorized discussions occurred. Anyone deemed a potential risk was either reassigned, monitored, or discreetly removed from sensitive positions. The palace's intelligence network, often underestimated by the public, was mobilized to track rumors, intercept potential leaks, and manage the narrative before it could spread. Simultaneously, efforts were made to manage Harry's image. Public appearances, media engagements, and charitable activities were orchestrated to reinforce the perception of normalcy. Interviews were tightly controlled, and any questions that even hinted at paternity were skillfully deflected. Advisors coached those around Harry to avoid topics that could lead to uncomfortable revelations. It was a delicate dance, balancing visibility with discretion engagement with avoidance. Behind closed doors, tension escalated. Some advisors argued for a proactive approach, suggesting that acknowledging the truth quietly could mitigate future fallout. Others insisted on complete suppression, emphasizing that any concession would be interpreted as weakness, an opening for relentless media scrutiny. The palace was caught between two imperatives: protect the monarchy's image at all costs and prevent a personal scandal from becoming a public crisis. Each decision carried enormous weight, each misstep a potential disaster. The dynamics between Charles, the official father, and James Hewitt, the biological father, were another source of complexity. While Hewitt had no official role in the monarchy, the confirmation of paternity introduced a human element that could not be managed by protocol alone. The palace feared that any interaction, or even the hint of acknowledgement, could provide the media with ammunition, fueling endless speculation and tabloid frenzy. The very existence of the DNA results became a living threat, a secret with the power to destabilize relationships, reputations, and the carefully constructed royal narrative. Meanwhile, Harry remained largely unaware of the full scope of the revelations. While some aides hinted at the existence of doubts and suspicions, the concrete confirmation of his biological parentage was shielded from him. This secrecy, however, came at a cost. Advisors worried that if Harry ever learned the truth on his own, outside the controlled environment of the palace, the reaction could be unpredictable. Emotional fallout, public statements, or personal decisions could ignite the scandal the monarchy was desperate to avoid. The palace's challenge was not only to manage the present, but to anticipate the unpredictable future, a task that required both foresight and an almost psychic understanding of human behavior. The media's role was also a pressing concern. Even with the palace's most sophisticated monitoring systems, leaks were inevitable. Gossip columns, investigative journalists, and rival outlets were constantly probing for inconsistencies, discrepancies, or overlooked clues.